When Robert leaves the house, he tries to take up as little space as possible. There's a quiet tension in the way he moves, the clothes he wears, the road he walks down, the feeling that he doesn't quite belong. His neighbourhood carries a reputation he didn't choose. There's growing cultural tension in his community, and he imagines people seeing him and thinking he's an outsider. The look in their eyes, real or imagined, seems to confirm that he's not welcome. Yet beneath that surface fear lies something deeper. The unsettling sense of being watched, evaluated, and silently condemned. When he returns home, the tension doesn't fade. It seeps into the walls, the clutter, the dated decor, the worn-out furniture. The house itself seems to reflect his unease. Tired, unimpressive, undesirable. He is embarrassed by how he lives. Robert feels the weight of comparison against the markers of success that society praises, status, taste, achievement. He measures himself and finds only failure. Many people share Robert's experience of being seen and rejected, as if the world had already made up its mind about them. It's not the guilt of having done something wrong, it's the shame of being something wrong. The French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre knew this feeling well, so well that he gave it a name. He called it le regard, or the look. For Sartre, the look is the moment you realise you're being observed. In an instant, you no longer experience yourself as free and fluid, but as something fixed in another person's gaze, an object to be defined, categorised and judged. And once that experience repeats it often enough, it no longer requires anyone else to trigger it. The scrutiny becomes internal. You start watching yourself through imagined eyes, carrying the judgment of others wherever you go. To understand why this idea haunted Sartre, it helps to look at his own life. He didn't invent the look as theory, he lived under it. Jean-Paul Sartre was born in Paris in 1905. His father, a naval officer, died of fever when Sartre was still an infant, leaving him to be raised by his mother, Anne-Marie, and his strict domineering grandfather, Charles Schweitzer. Yet it was not his upbringing that shaped his philosophy most deeply, but his appearance. Sartre had strabismus, a pronounced wandering eye that caused one eye to drift away from the other. By conventional standards, he was considered strikingly unattractive. From an early age, he became aware of how people looked at him, the fleeting glances, the stares that lingered too long, the subtle recoil of politeness. He was small, barely 5'2", with thick glasses that magnified his misaligned eyes. Whenever he caught the first flicker of someone's reaction, he felt himself reduced to an object of ridicule. His childhood was marked by contradiction. His mother adored him, convinced he was destined for greatness. His grandfather treated him as a prodigy, giving him free rein in his vast library. In their eyes, Jean-Paul was exceptional. But the world outside told a different story. Other children mocked him. Adults' faces betrayed unease. The tension between those two audiences, one adoring, one condemning, split his sense of self. He lived between admiration and rejection, never entirely at home in either. As a young man, Sartre turned that inner fracture into relentless ambition. If he couldn't be admired for his looks, he would be admired for his mind. If he couldn't dominate physically, he would dominate with his intellect and ideas. At the prestigious École Normale Supérieure, he met Simone de Beauvoir, another brilliant philosophy student who would later become a towering figure in feminist thought. Their partnership was unlike anything in the history of philosophy. They made a radical pact. Complete honesty, no secrets, no conventional boundaries. They shared everything, including the details of their other relationships. But that honesty carried a heavy cost. They were constantly observing and evaluating each other, each serving as both mirror and critic. Even in love, Sartre could not escape the look. Then came the war. Sartre was drafted into the French army as a meteorologist, and in 1940 captured by German forces. For 9 months he lived as a prisoner of war, The celebrated intellect of Parisian cafes became, overnight, another body to be numbered and managed. His individuality vanished under the scrutiny of captivity. To the Germans he was not a thinker, not a person of ideas, merely a prisoner, a statistic, an object. When he returned to occupied France in 1941, having secured his release through false medical papers, he joined the resistance. But Paris itself had become a city of eyes. The Nazis had turned neighbours into informants. Anyone could be watching. Every glance might conceal suspicion. Every silence might hide betrayal. Under that atmosphere of surveillance, the very act of walking through the streets meant living inside someone else's gaze. It was in this world, occupied Paris, 1943, surrounded by invisible watchers, that Sartre wrote Being and Nothingness. At its core was one urgent question: what happens to our freedom when we are reduced to objects in another's world? After the war, Sartre became famous, one of the most recognizable intellectuals of his time. His face appeared everywhere, in newspapers, on magazine covers, in photographs that immortalized his distinctive features. The wandering eye, the thick glasses, the ever-present cigarette. He had moved from being pitied to being admired, from a curiosity to a cultural icon. Yet the scrutiny never left him. He remained a spectacle, only now it came wrapped in fascination instead of discomfort. The shame he carried as a child of a lazy eye never truly disappeared. It simply changed its form. Sartre understood the quiet torment of being seen, not merely observed but defined. Let us return to Robert, who we introduced at the start, because through Sartre's lens we can gain insight into his experience. Robert leaves the house with his shoulders slightly hunched, moving carefully through the world as though he might disappear if he stayed quiet enough. What's really happening here? He's not simply walking down the street. He's walking as someone being seen, or at least as someone who believes he is. Each step feels like an audition for an imagined audience, and in that audition he feels like he's failing. Yet here's the strange part. Most of the time, no one is actually watching. The street might be empty. The neighbours might be at work. The person whose judgment Robert fears might not even exist at that moment. So why does the shame remain? Because Robert has internalized it. He no longer needs an audience. He's absorbed it completely. He views himself through hostile eyes and perpetuates their judgment long after they've gone. Sartre saw this as a defining feature of human life. When you're absorbed in something, reading, building, thinking, you simply are. You're present, unself-conscious. But the moment you sense that someone might be observing you, the quality of your awareness changes. You're no longer just living, you're being seen. You step outside yourself, imagining how you appear in another's world. Sartre famously illustrated this with a simple scene. Imagine you're peering through a keyhole, completely absorbed in what lies beyond. You're not thinking about yourself, your mind is entirely directed outward. Then suddenly you hear footsteps behind you. Everything shifts. You're no longer the one looking, you're the one being watched. In an instant, you're transformed into a voyeur, caught, defined, and shamed. The presence of the other fixes you in place. In their eyes, you are now something specific, a person invading someone's privacy. You can't talk your way out of that moment. You've been named, and the name holds. This is what happens to Robert. Over years of small experiences, glances that linger too long, conversations that end too quickly, the quiet exclusion that signals who does and doesn't belong. He has absorbed 1,000 reminders, rightly or wrongly, of how others perceive him. Now he carries those verdicts with him, enforcing them before anyone else can. And the most insidious part is that he doesn't even need direct proof. The mind fills in what it fears. A passing comment, negative stories in the media, even silence, all become confirmation in Robert's mind. Once he believes others see him as lesser, every ambiguous moment strengthens the case against him. The street he lives in, the dated furnishings, the absent greetings, how he compares to others, everything reflects his supposed inadequacy. When Robert walks down the street, he's not just reacting to others' eyes, he's anticipating them. He convicts himself before the trial begins, and the imagined audience in his mind is much harsher than any real one could ever be. At home the pattern deepens. Robert surveys his living room through an imagined visitor's eyes. The furniture, the colour of the walls, the smallness of the space. Each becomes evidence of inadequacy. He's not just inhabiting a house, he's dwelling inside a verdict. He's become both prisoner and guard. Sartre would ask, whose voice is speaking here? When Robert thinks failure, who is really talking? It's not Robert. It's the voice of people, that vague, invisible authority that dictates how a life should look. But who decided these rules? Who declared that independence counts more than being a carer, or that success matters more than kindness, or that a person's worth can be measured by what they own? These aren't truths. They're social conventions, absorbed and replayed until we mistake them for reality. This is where Sartre introduces the idea of bad faith. Bad faith means denying a central truth, that while certain facts about our lives are fixed, the meaning we apply to them is not. It's what happens when we take a label, whether imposed by others or self-assigned, and treat it as an absolute and eternal. When Robert says, "I am a failure," he's not describing his situation, he's delivering a verdict. He's turning a changeable condition into an identity. Sartre called this self-deception because no person is ever just one thing. We are not static objects. We are consciousness, fluid, interpretive, endlessly capable of assigning new meaning to what we are. That doesn't mean Sartre believed we can simply think away our misery. He drew a line between the unchangeable facts of existence and freedom, which lies in how we respond to them. You can't wish away poverty or prejudice or loss, but you can choose what those realities mean, whether they harden into shame or open into dignity, solidarity, or quiet defiance. So when Sartre says we are responsible, he doesn't mean we caused our situation. He means we are responsible for what we make of it, for how we interpret it, for whether we surrender to society's story or begin to write our own. This isn't an easy path. It offers no comfort, no reassurance. It's heavy with responsibility and dread. Because once you accept that interpretation is within your power, you can no longer say, "I had no choice." And that is daunting, especially for those who have endured genuine judgment, exclusion, or hardship. It feels safer to accept an unchangeable identity than to face the vastness of possibility. It's easier to say, "I am a failure," than to say, "I could begin to challenge the assumptions that I've been living under." Sartre would say this fear is not weakness, it's part of being human. Most of us retreat, at least sometimes, into the safety of fixed definitions, because possibility feels too open, too demanding. But the cost of that safety is high. We keep living as characters in someone else's story, instead of authors of our own. Beneath all this lies a deeper truth that Sartre understood, a paradox at the heart of being human. We need other people. This isn't only about how we judge ourselves, it's about our need to be witnessed, recognised, and affirmed. Sartre believed this need defines us as human, and also explains much of our suffering. We cannot exist fully in isolation. We need witnesses to confirm our existence, to acknowledge that we're here. Without that recognition, parts of our reality remain incomplete. Think about it. If you achieve something remarkable but no one would ever know, would it feel entirely real? If you endured deep pain and no one acknowledged it, would it feel valid? We rely on others to witness our experience, to make it feel solid and meaningful. Their recognition tells us that our existence means something. Yet here lies the tragedy. The moment others see us, they also define us. Their recognition comes wrapped in judgment. We become something in their world, a type, a category, an object, and that something is rarely what we hoped it would be. We are caught then in what Sartre saw as the central human conflict. We need to be seen, yet we fear what being seen will turn us into. We long for recognition, but it often comes at the price of freedom, the cost of being reduced to someone else's version of us. Robert feels this conflict every time he considers inviting someone over. Part of him craves connection, the simple relief of being known. The silence of his life has become heavy, the isolation unbearable. He wants someone to witness him, to acknowledge that he exists and that his life has weight. But he also knows that visibility invites assessment. It means becoming a specimen again, the middle-aged man who hasn't achieved much, the one with the house in the worst part of town, the person who didn't measure up. So he stays hidden. He closes the door on the possibility of both judgment and recognition. In doing so, he protects himself from the pain of being seen, but also from the affirmation that can make him feel real. He exists in suspension between two painful states, never fully visible, never completely invisible, haunted by imagined criticism, yet starved of the genuine recognition he needs to feel whole. This is the heart of what Sartre called ontological shame, the shame of being seen at all. It isn't about guilt or wrongdoing, it's the shame of existing, of taking up space, of being visible in a world that constantly evaluates our worth by its standards. When Robert feels shame about his life, it isn't about a single decision or failure. Circumstances may have trapped him, an ill parent, a lost job, bad luck, but shame is indifferent to context. It doesn't care about reasons. The verdict is unforgiving. Not I failed, but I am a failure. Not I did something wrong, but I am something wrong. Once that belief takes root, it spreads. It follows you outside, follows you home. It follows you as you try to fall asleep. It lingers in quiet moments and colours every reflection of yourself. What began as a feeling hardens into identity, the filter through which you see everything. It's no longer something you experience, it's something you are. Here's where Sartre becomes both unsettling and illuminating. He would say that Robert is lying to himself, maybe not consciously, but lying nonetheless. When Robert says I am a failure, he's treating himself as something finished, a completed object with a fixed essence. But he isn't a thing, he's a consciousness, a living process of becoming, choosing, and continually interpreting his life. The life he's living now isn't his nature, it's his situation. And while situations can be difficult, they're not permanent identities. Robert still possesses agency, not the power to magically escape his circumstances, but the capacity to respond differently tomorrow than he did today, to assign new meaning to his life, to challenge society's interpretation and begin shaping his own. That, however, is the hardest truth to face when you're drowning in shame. Shame often persists because it feels easier than possibility. It's easier to say, this is just how my life is, than to face the unbearable thought that you could choose otherwise. Because once you accept that you can change your situation, you also accept responsibility. You can no longer hide behind nature, fate, or the comforting idea that this is just who I am. If Robert fully accepted his role in his situation, he'd have to confront painful questions. He can no longer blame others. He would have to accept responsibility. He would have to answer a multitude of difficult questions. Why haven't I chosen differently? Why do I cling to these thoughts and behaviours that undermine me? Why do I quit when things become difficult? When will I face my fears and stop enforcing my own captivity? These questions are uncomfortable, and Sartre doesn't try to soften them. He doesn't say, it's all right, you're doing your best. He simply says, you are free, you've always been free. You're not responsible for your circumstances, but you are responsible for your response to them. Yet Sartre isn't condemning Robert or anyone like him. He isn't judging the instinct to hide from possibility. He's recognising how human it is. Facing one's role in any situation is one of the hardest things a person can do. It means admitting that life could have been different, that it could still be different, and that nothing, no outside force, no destiny, no past, determines your path completely. That's a frightening realisation. And this awareness doesn't make shame vanish. Sartre offers no quick fix or promise of relief. He knew the scrutiny of others is real. He knew we can't simply stop caring what people think. He spent his life under that gaze, as the awkward child, the brilliant philosopher, the public radical, the man everyone watched. He never escaped the look. This led him to believe that shame has two origins. One is external, the genuine judgments of others and the structures of exclusion that shape our world. These exist and they're not your fault. Robert lives in a society that measures worth through money, independence and possessions. He lives in a place where social tension still marks who is welcome and who is not. These forces inflict pain and embarrassment and make him feel inadequate. But the other source of shame is internal. The way we accept those judgments as absolute truth. The way we take the look and weave it into our identity. The way we tell ourselves, this is who I am, and stop questioning it. Robert doesn't just suffer under prejudice or inequality. He anticipates it, rehearses it, forces it upon himself with more cruelty than most others would. In doing so, he surrenders the very power that could help him resist, becoming both prisoner and jailer within the same story. Sartre would remind Robert, and all of us, that there is still a choice, not an easy one, not a comforting one, but a choice nonetheless. You can begin to notice when it happens. The quiet moments when you turn yourself into an object. You can catch the voice that judges you and start to ask, whose voice is this? Whose standards am I obeying? What would happen if I tested these imagined judgments against reality? Am I responding to real criticism or to my fear of it? You can't escape scrutiny entirely. You can't stop others from forming opinions or filtering you through their assumptions. Existence requires exposure, and exposure brings vulnerability. But you can stop doing their work for them. You can stop becoming your own harshest observer. You can begin to separate what comes from the outside, the real, flawed, often fleeting judgment of others, from what you have accepted as the permanent truth about yourself. And that leads to Sartre's hardest question, the one that lingers after all the theory and philosophy has been stripped away. Are you ready to face your freedom, or is it easier to remain the object of your own condemnation? For Robert, knowing Sartre won't cure the feeling of being watched and judged. He'll still live in that same house, he'll still walk down that same street, he'll still feel the weight of social judgment, the reality of economic struggle, the sting of exclusion. But something might begin to shift. He may start to see the difference between external assessment and his internalization of it as ultimate truth. The neighbours may still regard him a certain way, or perhaps they don't. Society still has standards he doesn't meet. Standards that may themselves deserve questioning. Somewhere along the way, though, he began doing their work for them, becoming his own harshest critic. Now he has a choice, to keep serving that internal judge or to begin resisting it. Sartre never asked us to ignore what others think. He isn't offering a cheerful, just be yourself message or pretending that judgment doesn't hurt. He knew we're social beings, that we need to be seen and acknowledged and that the look is real. It shapes us whether we like it or not. What he offers instead is quieter and harder. Notice when you've turned yourself into an object to be labelled. Because there's the uncomfortable truth. You're not a failure, but you're not a success either. We're not any fixed thing at all. We are consciousness, a freedom, a movement, a process of becoming. The moment we accept any label, even a flattering one, we close the door on that freedom to define ourselves. This doesn't mean Robert's circumstances don't matter. They do. Poverty is real. Prejudice is real. Social exclusion and economic hardship shape lives in profound, lasting ways. Sartre never denied that. But the shame that seeps into the soul, the I am something bad feeling, that's not only given from outside, it's also something we help create. We take the world's verdict and make it our own reflection. We turn judgment into identity. We are complicit in our own condemnation. And if we made it, we can unmake it. Not easily or quickly, not without fear or resistance, but we can begin by asking whose voice we're really hearing when we condemn ourselves, by noticing when we become both the watcher and the watched, by recognizing the quiet possibility that we remain free. Not free to erase our past or undo the facts of our situation, but free to choose what those facts mean and to respond differently. Free to refuse the world's interpretation as the final word. The look will never disappear. We will always exist, to some degree, as objects in other people's worlds, judged, defined, misunderstood. That is the price of being human, to depend on others for recognition, even as we struggle under the weight of their gaze. But we don't have to surrender to that gaze completely. Sartre never did. All his life he was looked at as ugly, as brilliant, as controversial, as the face of existentialism itself. He never escaped being seen, but he also never stopped insisting on his freedom to define himself, to choose, to become something other than what others decided he was. Perhaps that's the most we can do, to acknowledge the look, to feel the shame it brings, to understand where it comes from, but to refuse to let it define us. Because you are not a finished thing. You are not a museum piece, catalogued and unchanging. You remain in motion, unfolding, interpreting, responding. And yes, that openness is frightening, but it's also where possibility lives. Your story is not over yet.